This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 157 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today's topic is all about uncommon destinations. I really love the idea of heading to more uncommon destinations, you know, the kind of places that people either haven't even heard of or have never been to or don't know too much about. There's lots of reasons for it. I haven't done enough of this lately, but back in my 20s when I was living abroad, I did especially try hard to do it. At the time, so this is kind of early to mid 2000s, I particularly loved exploring places like the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, which at the time were pretty rarely visited. These days, they're still relatively uncommon destinations compared to, say, France or Italy, but a lot more is known about them now. But Estonia especially, I've been there twice, and I haven't been back for some years, and I'm dying to go back. But you might wonder, why do I love uncommon destinations? Or you might not, because you might feel the same. But for me, there's a couple of reasons, especially, usually I kind of have no expectations about these places. It's not like going to France and having heard and read and seen so much about it over the years. When I go to a less known destination, I just don't have those expectations. So I'm easily amazed and easily impressed. And similarly, I often don't have much knowledge about the culture or the language or the history, just because it's not, available in popular culture so much. And that is wonderful for curious people like me. At the moment, I keep daydreaming about heading to some of those other former USSR countries like the Stans and Georgia. I keep reading about Georgia lately and hearing people who've been there and loved it. I was asking about it in the Thoughtful Travellers Facebook group the other day. So I'm not quite sure where I'll get to next, but I always like to daydream about it. Anyway, in today's episode, we're going to hear about 3 particularly uncommon destinations. The first is one of the Stans. The second is a place you probably still wouldn't go as a tourist, but my guest went there for work and it was interesting to hear about. And the third is a very happy place, which doesn't get too many visitors, but for another reason. So that's just teasing, isn't it? But let's start off with our first guest today is Liz Green. And Liz is a friend and client of mine here in Perth, and lovely, lovely lady who also has a bit of a travel bug, just like me. And it was awesome to speak to her about her particular uncommon destination.
A few years ago, my son, who is living and working in Dubai, got transferred to Kazakhstan for about 9 months. And he was based in Astana, which is the capital. So we thought, well, let's go on an adventure and visit Astana.
Definitely, I would.
Yeah, so we meant to go to other places as well, but this was the starting point. So it was very, very cold when we got there, even though it was technically spring. Snowing and, I can't remember, lots and lots of degrees below anything I would normally contemplate. And we really had no idea what to expect when we were out in the community. Mm-hmm. And I'm a little bit cautious, particularly when I'm traveling. So, I was sort of prepared for, will we be mugged every 5 minutes, or will we be harassed for bribes, or I don't know. My mind had gone to all sorts of things. Anyway, one of my first excursions outside, on my own, it had been really cold the last few days, and then this particular morning the sun came out, and I was making my way across to this shopping centre where I knew I could get sort of a flat white. And this little old lady, all dressed in fur, she grabbed me by the arm and started speaking to me in, I didn't know whether it was Kazakh or Russian, but either way, I didn't speak anything other than, spasibo or something like that. So she's gone on and she's explained whatever it was to me. And then I've just looked at her blankly and shaken my head and gone Ingleski or something I thought sounded a bit Russian. Anyway, she wouldn't let go of my arm. And then then she pointed and I looked up, and above the entrance to the shopping centre was these giant icicles, easily as big as me. And what she was clearly trying to convey was, don't get hit by the icicle.
Oh, gosh.
So once I acknowledged to her that I understood what she was saying, she let me go on my way. Oh. But I just thought, wow, this is so different to what I'd expected. She could see, obviously, I was not a local person, and her first concern was to make sure that I didn't come to any harm. And this was something we experienced the whole time we were in Astana. We just had incredible kindness. My husband slipped in the street and a bunch of men all leapt forward and caught him.
Brilliant.
He also went adventuring on the bus, and again had the whole, a little group around him, all trying to work out where it was he was actually trying to go to and how to get there, and, how to pay, which was, like some teeny weeny little coin. But I think that's the story that gets a lot of interest from our friends, because it's not somewhere that a lot of people have, chosen to go for a holiday, and it's sort of an unknown quantity. But I'm here to tell you, go there. It was brilliant. We had the best time. And we finally ended up on our last night, as we were staggering out of a restaurant very late at night, a gentleman asked us to go into a room with him. My son was off getting an Uber. Meanwhile, we went, oh, why not? So in we went. And it turned out that it was an engagement party. Oh. But the couple who were getting engaged had already gone. But obviously the family weren't ready to call it a night. So apparently it's good luck to have strangers come into your celebration.
Oh, wow.
So before we knew it, we were knocking back the vodka and taking turns at giving speeches. And I practiced a sentence in Kazakh, which I can't remember now, but all I know is they all just looked and smiled politely.
Oh, whoops. So you maybe didn't get it quite right.
It was something to do with being the mother and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, my son came into the room looking horrified.
What has my mother done here?
Yeah, exactly. And sat down with us, and eventually we left, and he told us we'd ruined his Uber rating. But yeah, we had the most fabulous night. So we got home about 3:00 in the morning, all very much the worse for wear, but just left the country with the feeling that we would love to go back and spend more time there.
So Liz's story basically demonstrates one of my favourite ways of going to an uncommon destination, when you know someone who's living there, in this case her son. It's the kind of place that otherwise you might not even think to put on your list, but you get there and you love it for various reasons. And obviously Liz got to know how friendly and welcoming the Kazakhs were, and it sounded awesome. I actually had... probably a decade back now, I knew for a few years a lovely Kazakh lady who'd moved here to Perth, and she's since moved on to Queensland, I think. But I was very intrigued at the time to learn more and more about Kazakhstan. So, yes, as I said, I'm very curious about the stands at the moment, so that's one of them. Now, my next guest today is Eva Westerling, and Eva actually ended up visiting somewhere you probably wouldn't choose to go as a tourist, but she ended up visiting northern Iraq, so the Kurdish area of Iraq, as part of her work consulting on a new hospital being built in the area. Now, I don't know if any of us would pick Iraq, but Eva got to go there for work, and it was fascinating to hear about what she got to see and do there.
I arrived very, very early in the morning, had a bit of a sleep in the hotel, and then I had the afternoon to myself. I was meeting my colleague and the local colleagues for dinner. So I had some time, and I asked the reception in the hotel what's the best way to get into the city to do some sightseeing, and they said, you can take our car or you can just get a taxi. I was like, okay, price difference, I'll take the taxi.
Right.
And I got really lucky with that because I had a taxi driver who had actually spent 3 or 4 years in the UK, like working and living there. So his English was perfect. And so, he drove me into the city. He told me where to go, what to do, and gave me his phone number so I could call him when I'm finished.
Perfect.
And he would pick me up and drive me somewhere else or drive me back to the hotel, whatever I wanted. And he didn't even make me pay. Like, he actually only took the money when he dropped me off at the hotel in the afternoon.
For the whole, for each trip, for the whole day. It wasn't until he didn't. Wow. That's very trusting.
Talk about trust, right? Like, that would never, ever happen here.
Oh, my goodness.
But, so he was like, no, you can pay me later. And I'm like, okay, right?
Oh.
Fine, no problem.
How awesome.
I actually visited the old part of the city of Erbil. They have a citadel that dates back to, I think, pretty much Babylonian times. I mean, it's like really, really, really old. And it used, like, the whole area is fairly flat. And that citadel sticks out because it's like, I'm not sure how high up, 70 meters, 100 meters, something like that. And apparently it's not natural. Like, it's just because there's been, like, mud buildings, like how they built out of the mud. And then when houses broke down, they would just build on top of them, and it just raised itself higher and higher and higher. And now it's like this sort of round area in the middle of the city that's just above everything else. And they're actually starting to renovate a lot of it. And they put a few museums up there, like you can see cool. That they have a carpet museum or textile museum where they have carpets from all the different tribes and regions, and and then they have like a costume museum where you can see all the traditional clothes from all the tribes, and like Kurdish from Turkey and Kurdish from Iraq and Kurdish from Iran and whatever. They're so spread out, and like a lot of the history. And again, because there isn't that much tourism, it's sometimes hard to find somebody who can speak a language that you speak. So in that costume museum, I had a lady talk to me about it in Arabic.
Right.
Which was, I still understood.
Enough
to feel happy about what I've learned. So
that's good. Well done. That is awesome.
And then in one of the other places, I met a father with his 2 children, and we started talking, and he was actually from Erbil, but he'd never been up there. So it's the day of school or something, and he took his kids to go see it. And so we talked a bit. He actually spoke pretty good English. So that was also really interesting.
I imagine in general there's no tourists around, right?
Well, there were some, but I think they were actually all from Iraq. At least on that day. So I didn't see anybody who didn't look like they belong there, sort of. But they were for touristic reasons, at least up there. There were a couple of groups, or maybe from other Arabic countries. I'm not sure where they were, but there were some people. And then, the second day we actually drove to the place where that hospital is supposed to be built. So that was a lot of driving back and forth, and we had to make sure we come back during daylight hours, because driving at night is mostly unsafe, I think, because of road conditions and not so much because of actual threats or something.
Right.
But they don't like to drive in the dark. So we, other than in the city, of course, for dinner, we never left before 10 o'clock. At least it felt like I had to eat very late every evening.
Oh, that doesn't suit me.
No, me neither, but it was interesting. So lots of interesting food, like something that's very traditional in that area apparently is some sort of carp, like fish, carp, that they prepare, like they sort of flip it open and put it on wood and like roasted by the fire. It's sort of similar to what the Scandinavians do with salmon. Like it's called flamskap and you can sometimes buy it on German Christmas markets. So they do that with the carp, and it has to be very slow process of heating it and roasting it or whatever, so that all the smelly oil runs out of it.
Oh, right.
And what's really fresh tasting fish, because I don't like carp, because to me it always tastes like muddy water. I don't know. I've never enjoyed it.
Same.
But that was actually really, really nice. And then there was lots of vegetables, like grilled vegetables with it. And of course you get like hummus and tabbouleh and all these, dishes from that area, I guess. But so, yeah, that was really, really interesting. And surprisingly, the majority of people I met were Christians. So there seems to be a big group of Christians in Kurdistan because they actually fled from Iraq.
Right.
Time. So now there's quite a high percentage in comparison. So yeah, I mean, things were fairly easygoing. There were drinks, and people, like the women had their hair open. There was, you didn't need to cover, and of course, I always try to dress appropriately in those countries. So I had long skirts and long sleeved shirts or blouses or whatever for this. But I didn't have to wear a headscarf other than in the midday sun when it was too hot to have my hair out, because you get heat stroke.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was actually interesting. That was a surprise. I didn't really know that before I went.
No.
Even with all the research I had done, that's something that I hadn't really read about before. And I was trying to find like a travel guide or like a guidebook to go to Iraq, but apparently, I mean, maybe I found one online, but in none of the shops there's even anything remotely like that. I think.
I'm not surprised though, because I guess there's not much of a market for it.
Apparently not, but which is a shame, because it's so beautiful up there. I mean, I guess the further south you get, the drier and sort of more boring it gets. The desert they have is not a pretty one.
Right.
But towards the north, they have spectacular mountains. Not high enough for snow, I guess. At least not at the time of year I was there in September. But, it gets a bit greener, and there's a couple of lakes that I could also see when I flew out from the plane.
Okay.
And there's apparently some more archaeological sites around where you can, look at really, really old buildings or, things, whatever. So I'm actually, I really want to go back and discover a bit more,
now that you've had a taste for it.
Yes, exactly.
Oh,
and
goodness.
on the last day, our local colleagues, actually, the one lady, her husband works in some ministry for, like, as a Christian, whatever thing. He had met 3 popes. I mean, he's like, it was kind of
theme of the day.
Crazy people. But yeah, so they took pretty much all of the day, or at least until the afternoon, they took off work, and they picked us up from the hotel, and they took us to have coffee and tea and to visit the citadel again, because my colleague hadn't been there. Right. And we went to a couple of really cool like tea places where, which had been around forever, and where a lot of kind of local famous people had visited, and, like writers had been sitting there writing their books and whatnot.
Wow.
And all these stories, and that was really, really cool. And then, they took us to their favorite lunch restaurant, and we had a huge feast with, oh my God, so much to eat, and so good. The food was actually fantastic. And then they drove us to the airport. So, it was a short trip. Sadly, it was only 3 days. And like I said, I'm actually wanting to go back.
Yeah.
Not sure when that's going to happen, because I'm not quite sure how easy it would be to actually get a visa,
Yeah,
so
to go independently.
I'm not so sure, but if any of your listeners is interested, maybe.
Yes, well, that's right. Exactly. You never know who's out there. I'm not quite ready to put Iraq on my must-visit list yet, but you never know. A decade or 2 later, everything can change. Now, my final guest today is Justin Watson, and we had a long chat about a destination I've long wanted to visit. It's that place that often tops the happiness charts, Bhutan. So, as you might know, you can't really visit Bhutan freely. You have to join, you don't have to join a tour as such. You pay a fixed fee per day. You have a guide and a driver, and then they kind of organise everything for you, hotels, meals, water, everything except kind of alcohol and souvenirs, basically. It can be around $200 a day or more if you go for fancier hotels and stuff. So I was chatting to Justin about this, and he had invited his friend Noel to go along with him. They met up in Bangkok and then flew in to Bhutan.
You land in a town called Paro, which is near the capital, Thimphu, but it's renowned for being one of the most scary landings because to me it wasn't scary. It's not. It's just the fact that they have to fly through the valleys, and then they do turn. And when they turn, the planes are that close to the ground, you can kind of see people, and it's not necessarily cars you're seeing up below. You can see people in the houses, and I don't know how high off the ground you are, but it's not not very high, a few hundred meters. And so, yeah, it kind of makes a few turns and then lands in the valley. And it's one of those, if you ever see a list, it's one of those landings that always appears on the dangerous airport, even though I don't think they've had too many crashes. So
right, yeah, it's just not the standard plenty of space kind of runway approach area. Yeah.
And from the moment you get to the airport building is very traditional kind of I guess it's like a Buddhist kind of architecture, temple-y looking thing. And you're like, oh, this is pretty interesting. And our guide was there, Tenzin, and I don't think the driver spoke any English, but English is, I believe, a de facto second language in Bhutan. So, and they're very big on being bilingual, so English and I think Druk is the official name of the language. But so they're very big on being able to speak two languages. And part of the fee that you pay for every day, I believe it's about $65, goes to the education system. So they make a big deal. So they make a big deal that $65 of that money you're paying is going to the education system in the country to educate the people. So you kind of don't feel too bad about it, and the rest of it, I believe, covers your costs and things like that. And we had arranged a kind of an itinerary, and I was going for 8 days, and there was a lot of Buddhists don't like building temples in valleys. So there's a lot of, and I was not completely prepared for all the climbing.
Right.
The walking up hills.
Yeah.
I knew towards the end of the trip there was the major site in Bhutan was up a hill, and I knew it was a bit of a hard walk, but I wasn't prepared for the fact that every day we were going to be walking up a hill to see mostly temples, and there were a lot of and then there were a lot of these bigger places in the valleys which were fortified temples called zongs, I think, from memory, and they were much bigger, but they're in the valley, so they had to fortify those. And I got to know the guide reasonably well, because you are spending every day. They're not very strict. Like you can walk around without your guides. It's not like
North Korea or something.
No. So there are a number of times, and we would be staying somewhere, and the guide would say, "Oh, dinner's at 7," and we were there at 4:00 in the afternoon. We checked into the hotel, and 3 hours, and
so you've got a bit of free time. You can, okay.
I know one afternoon I asked the guide about our archery being a national sport. So I said, I'd love to have a go at archery. So one afternoon we set up a make-do archery field or something like that. And Bhutanese archers are really good, which means Westerners or travellers or whatever coming along to try Bhutanese archery looks really bad, because you're shooting from I think it's 120 metres or some really long distance.
Whoa. Okay.
Whereas archery at the Olympics is over a much shorter distance, and they made a big note about Bhutanese archers are so good we shoot over a larger distance. I'm going, okay. And sure enough, we're frogged off down the field, and I can barely see the target. And my guide's like, there was nothing much to the bow. It was just like there was nothing fancy about the bow, not like one of these fancy things you see at Olympics or things like that. And he was hitting the target, and I'm struggling to get the arrow actually halfway down the field, let alone near the target.
Oh gosh!
But whether they were lying or not, they said I was very good at it, and I'm like, sure.
Thanks for the kind words.
Thanks for the kind words. Some of the other thing that's very typical was the one of their national dishes, which literally is just green chilies and cheese.
Oh,
and it's something they love. They eat, and I forget the name for it, but it's really spicy. It was.
Did they eat it with something or just?
Yeah, the meals we would get served were typically multiple courses or multiple dishes, so very much like going to, say, any kind of Asian restaurant, and you might have, a couple of curries or something. It was kind of like a bit of everything. There were some curry type dishes, and then there were these chili dishes, and I vaguely remember having some dishes with potatoes, and often there'd be a salad, and you just were given a banquet nearly every night. It was just way too much food. But and it's such a small country that everyone seems to know each other. Like even to the point that we were driving over the mountain one day. I say over the mountain, there's a lot of mountain passes, and we stopped, and my guide says, "Oh, a member of the royal family's coming." And I go, well, this is exciting. And anyway, so the company I was going with, they were also running a motorcycle tour at the time, and so the first couple of nights they were running on the same itinerary as us. So I was chatting to some of the people doing the motorcycle tour. Most of them were Australians, and so they're doing this motorcycle trip, and it sounded great. And the guide who was running the motorcycle trip was the brother of the princess who was coming up over the hill.
Wow.
This is how connected it is.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, and I believe she married the current king of Bhutan, who became king when his father abdicated, and I think he was about 30 when he became king, and so
wow.
But the thing, so his sister married the prince and became the queen, or I'm not sure what their titles are officially, but she was married to the king, and so she was coming over hill, and there was a bit of there weren't too many cars. Like, there was nothing too fancy. I think there was 2 cars, but the guide on the motorcycle tour had kind of disappeared and hidden behind the bushes, and he came out. And he said, I had to hide, otherwise she would have stopped and we'd have had to have a conversation, and it would have taken hours to get back on the road. And,
that's awesome.
And I just thought it was great, because, very few places in the world would you get such a interaction with the royal family. And
Justin's trip to Bhutan and what he experienced there just it fulfills exactly my needs for curiosity. For example, finding out that they're really into archery, that's a really unusual national sport, or that their food is green chilies and cheese is a national dish, all sorts of stuff like that. I love it. One day I will get there. Also in a future episode, Justin and I went on to talk about climbing to the Tiger's Nest Monastery, which is probably the most famous sightseeing spot in Bhutan that you would have seen pictures of. So watch out for that in a future episode. So that ends our stories of uncommon destinations for today. Thank you very much for listening to episode 157. All of the links and everything else will be in the show notes at notaballerina.com/157, which is where you'll find shout outs to these wonderful guests we had today. So thanks very much to Liz. You can find Liz at her copywriting business, Whizbang Writing, which is at whizbangwriting.com. Thanks also to Eva, and you can find her at her blog, Not Scared of the Jet Lag, at notscaredofthejetlag.com. And finally, thanks again to Justin, always a great guest, and he blogs at Justin's World, which is www.justins.world. Do come along and tell me in the Facebook group how you feel about uncommon destinations and where's the most unusual place you've visited. I would love to hear more. If you're not already in the Facebook group, just head to Facebook and type in Thoughtful Travellers and request to join, or check out the show notes and you can click through from the link there. So I hope you've enjoyed hearing about some of these uncommon destinations and hopefully sparked some new travel ideas for you as well. It certainly has for me. Thank you very much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.